Hello everyone, it is Matt here from Scoop in Response. Today I wanted to run through a deck that I put together for two Commander Legends commanders, that being Krark the Thumbless and Sakashima of 1,000 Faces. Originally I wanted to put this video out a lot earlier, but I thought there may be some cool stuff coming with Kaldheim, given the snow themes and everything like that. It may have been worth holding off. I guess sadly we didn't really get a lot of cards that were going to help out this particular build, with the exception of one being Bergie. So without further ado, I thought we would run through this particular deck. So Krark the Thumbless is a really interesting card that came to us with Commander Legends, and it reads, when you flip a coin, so whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, flip a coin. If you lose the flip, you will return the spell to its owner's hand. If you win the flip, copy that spell and you may choose new targets for the copy. And obviously it's a partner commander as well, meaning we can have two. And the partner that I've chosen being Sakashima of 1,000 Faces. You may have Sakashima of 1,000 Faces enter the battlefield as a copy of another creature you control, except it has Sakashima of 1,000 Faces other abilities. And the legend rule doesn't apply to opponents you control. So it's really cool. Essentially, you can get around having one copy of a legendary creature, and we're going to make two and more Krark the Thumblesses, thanks to Sakashima, which is very exciting. Essentially, you combine these two commanders to make a really powerful Is It Spellslingers combo deck. The duo are really flexible. You've got a whole different bunch of ways that you could build this. And I've opted for going around a value copy sorceries with a storm finish. But there's really a whole bunch of different ways that you could build this. There is one extra turn spell in this build. There's clones, but you could do whatever you want and lean into each one of these really well. You could even look at copying permanents, I think, as well, with the likes of something like Orvar that's come out in the latest set, which is really cool, but once again, not included in this particular build. So we'll explore that Storm and Breach combo approach. So I guess Krark is extremely aggressively costed, being 1 and a red, so you can get him down turn 1 and turn 2 pretty much every game unless you're mulliganing really poorly. Sakashima obviously costs 4. Most of the time you're going to use it to enter as a copy of Krark to double up his abilities. We've got lots of different interesting targets that we could actually go for in the mid to late game as well. And so being a Storm deck, we're going to be casting lots of spells and copying them, or going infinite or close to infinite, which is really interesting with this deck. It goes close to infinite, and I would say it's going to come down to how you talk about this at the table. We have a lot of situations where we've got, above 95% success rate, and when you actually plot out the average number of times that you'll expect to execute something, it can get up to 50 to 80 times, and realistically you only need 40. So I would encourage you to really understand the math a little bit behind this and work out when you can ask the table if you can do a creative shortcut. Otherwise the deck will be very, very tedious. So you might want to find alternative ways to actually work out your probability if it comes down to doing something like flipping 40 coins or something like that. This is all going to make a lot more sense when we go further into the deck. So yeah, being the Storm deck that we are, we're going to be casting a whole bunch of spells. And what's really interesting with Krark is that spells that don't resolve still count towards your Storm count. So even if you cast the spell and then it's bounced back to your hand, that's still a cast, and it's a cast trigger, so it will count towards everything. It doesn't need to resolve for it to up your Storm count, which is a really cool thing, I think. So the win cons that we've got for the deck, we're going to be using, I guess, amongst my play group, this gets discussed as whether it's the worst or best card ever printed. We've got 1,000 Year Storm. We're going to be also using Underworld Breach for some cool lines. Grape Shot. We've got Grape Shot somewhere. There we go, Grape Shot. And then Aether Flux Reservoir, which you may have seen. And then we're going to be doing some Infinite Turn stuff with Nexus of Fate. So there's a whole bunch of redundant ways. I would say if your playgroup doesn't particularly like certain things like Infinite Turns as a win con, you can cut that. It's not a big deal. It's more just another way that you can prevent yourself from losing rather than winning. The thing I like about Nexus of Fate is sometimes you can have these really late game situations in high-powered Commander where you would have you would essentially mill out if you don't have a very specific win con, but this can essentially stop you from milling out because it's always going to be going back into your library. So you don't even necessarily need to cast this a lot of the time for it to be valuable in the deck. It can just be used as a way to prevent someone else's win con through a mill or something like that. So we'll break down the deck, including modal double face cards. We've got 33 lands, but 30 regular lands. Oh, and I will say as well, I've got a sideboard here, which mostly consists of very expensive wheels and some cheap wheels, as well as Lion's Eye Diamond. In addition to this, there's going to be a few really obvious staples that if you're either playing on MTGO, they're a lot cheaper, but in paper they're not. So looking at Volcanic Island in particular. Lion's Eye Diamond, obviously very cheap as well on Moto, but these cards are crazy expensive in paper now, so I've left them in the sideboard. I would say if you own these cards or your playgroup's happy with proxies, like they're really obvious includes, they're really great. We'll talk about the wheels separately. I just don't like to necessarily put together $5,000 decks every time that essentially prevent people from being able to play the deck just because they don't have a time twister or something like that. So we've got 33 lands, including all the modal double face cards, 30 regular lands. We've got 4 enchantments, 13 artifacts, 25 instants, a lot of sorceries, which is, I guess, surprising when you think about a Storm deck. Having sorceries like this, it'll make sense. We're going to be using these in a different way than the main Storm combo. This is really just once we've generated those big Storm counts that we can take advantage of these as well. We've got 11 creatures, so it's super light on creatures, so we need to be mindful of our life total. I guess the only blocker that you'd consider would be Young Pyromancer because you're making a whole bunch of chumpers, which is great. And because we don't have a whole bunch of creatures, we also don't rely heavily on Planeswalkers as well. So I realize there is like a Ral that copies spells, and you could look at putting Saheeli or other things like that copy permanents. I think these are fine. If you want to up your creature count or you want to have more targeted removal, look at doing things like Bolt and that sort of thing, totally fine to include those kinds of cards. I've gone for a pretty lightweight build with that because I just don't really find it relevant to be attacking or blocking with creatures a lot in my particular meta. But, that's going to be very, very dependent on what you're looking at within yours. So we'll start with creatures. As I said, there's not a whole bunch. We've only got the 11 creatures total. We're going to be using our creatures to support us to accelerate to our win conditions or amplify our win conditions and create large amounts of attackers and blockers. So Shrieking Drake, absolutely amazing card. I would say get your hands on a card like this if you can. It's just absolutely awesome. These are one of those cards that it's just super hard to find anywhere because everyone who has one will never trade it with you, and it's a very old card. So essentially this is just a way for us to create infinite or huge storm counts because we can bounce it for 1 mana. So what that means is we cast it for 1 mana and then return it to our hand with its ETB effect. So each time we do that, we're spending 1 mana to generate 1 storm. So that's absolutely insane if we're going to have a big payoff. We've got Dockside Extortionist. It's kind of a staple at this point. I don't think it really needs explanation. You create a whole bunch of treasure tokens. Treasure tokens are really good. Effectively in this kind of deck, you can do all sorts of weird things like bounce it or create copies of it and essentially multiply its effect pretty hardcore. We've also got cards like Young Pyromancer, sort of talked about that. I think it's a great card. We're casting so many spells, and the cast triggers are what matters, not the resolution of the spell, so all of those elementals are great. Burgi, now this is the only Kaldheim card that I've included in this list. I just think it's an insane card. I've told everyone who will listen that this card is a card that you should spec. Right now it's $1.35 according to this particular pricing. You can get them for $1 to $2 locally at least. This is going to be another $10 card in 3 years time maybe. I think this will be very similar to something like Guardian Project, the green enchantment that's just draw a card. It's Beast Whisperer in an enchantment. That card, was 50 cents for absolutely ages before people started realizing just how good it was in EDH. I think Burgi is one of those cards that's going to increase in value by a lot because of just how good both sides are, and you can literally put this in any red deck and no one's going to sort of question it whether or not it's worth it. So we've got the whenever you cast a spell, add 1 red. Until end of turn, you don't lose mana as steps and phases end. Creatures you control can boast twice during each of your turns rather than once. We don't care about that last line of text. We don't care about our stats. All we care about is the fact that we don't lose mana during phases. So that means people can't do weird stuff during our upkeep, like, you know, they can't wasteland a key land in our upkeep, so that we can't activate it on our in our main phase. And that even applies to something like Gaia's Cradle in a green deck. You know, if someone wants to wasteland your Gaia's Cradle, it doesn't matter. You tap it anyway, and you still get to generate a whole bunch of mana. But it's also that ability to, if you're casting free or cheap spells, literally any red 1-drop in the deck becomes free with this creature out. But the other thing is that the actual card itself is just super boss on both sides. So I'll flip it over. So we've got the Harnfell Horn of Bounty. Discard a card, exile the top 2 cards of your library. You may play those cards this turn. So this card's just insane all around. It's just absolutely ridiculous. Both modes are perfectly relevant. You could make arguments for playing either side of these in so many different decks, particularly if you don't have a whole bunch of card draw effects. Obviously in blue we're pretty lucky, but if you don't have blue in the deck, it's just insane. So I would say most of the time we're going to be using Burgi to cast the Burgi side rather than the card advantage side, but it comes down to having all of your pieces in your hand. Maybe you just want to draw extra cards, you draw extra cards. If you've got an ability to generate mana already, you don't need to cast Burgi. Or if you just need a way to get to the win condition faster, get Burgi down, and then the next turn try and go off with it. We've got Dual Caster Mage. Now I realize there's a whole bunch of cards like Dual Caster Mage. You see all of these kinds of things that happen in Neoform decks and all of those different kinds of like creature-based, flash and copy, Lutri, all of that sort of stuff. They're great cards. I put one in because I like the flexibility of having a card like that. Every now and again there's going to be a scenario which occurs and you want to just have that happen and you just want access to 1 or 2. We don't have a whole bunch of ways to tutor for it, so and particularly at instant speed, but you know, it's a really great card overall, and I can definitely get behind putting one in, and given the reprint with Double Masters, makes it so cheap now. We've got Glasspool Mimic. I love this card. It's just so flexible. Copy something that you control. So, you know, if Sakashima's out, it's literally 3 mana, create another copy of Krark, or create another copy of your biggest threat or most important piece. So absolutely insane. Gutter Snipe, another way to win during those storm turns. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, Gutter Snipe deals 2 damage to each opponent. So, you know, just a win con on its own. It's also great because this card, I think, actually generates a pretty high threat level overall. People see this card and they go, right, I got to deal with that. There's something that could happen. And realistically, you know, creature-based removal is expensive, or it's hard to sort of have multiple copies of. Board wipes aside, you know, if we get our Gutter Snipe removed instead of a more key piece, we're very happy with that outcome. Next we've got Hull Breacher. I mean, this card's just gas. It works really well. It's another copy of Narset for stopping, you know, wheels and things like that. The argument that I mentioned earlier about wheels, so if we see, I haven't actually included a lot of them, and if you have a look at the deck tech, you'll actually see all of my considering cards and everything like that, and I'd encourage you to have a look through there. But with our sideboard, Time Twister, Wheel of Fortune, Windfall, Echo of Aeons, I haven't included these because of the fact that we're not in black, and there's a lot of Grixis decks in the high power levels now that will be running Hull Breacher, Narset, Notion Thief, what's the other one? Opposition Agent, and all of these things, you know, do a good job of either preventing those really big draw turns or those wheel effects. So if you feel like you can fit the wheels in and you've got the expensive versions of the card as well, I'd say go for it. This version isn't a wheel version, but you know, we do have the one wheel with the Reforge the Soul Miracle, just because I like playing with that card, and Miracle's always a fun way to spice up a game and spice up a turn. But Hull Breacher just on its own, it's in our colors, we can prevent other people's wheels from doing stuff, create more treasures, that's awesome. And yeah, I just think this is just too good of a value card to not include. Phyrexia Metamorph, flexibility, does everything. You can create, you know, a copy of literally anything you want on the battlefield. Any artifact or creature. So I just can't get behind, I just get behind this because of its flexibility. And the fact that it's only 3 mana, you can pay the Phyrexian if you want as well, makes it awesome. Spark Double, so you can have Spark Double enter as another creature or a planeswalker that you control, which would only ever be in our set, really. But it's another one of those non-legendary clones, which makes it awesome to do, I think. Treasonous Ogre. So what's pretty cool with Treasonous Ogre is you can go infinite really quickly with your Aetherflux Reservoir, and then this means that you can keep on storming off, because after your third cast of an ability, an Aetherflux Reservoir is going to net you life overall. So you pay 3 life, gain 1 red mana, use 1 red mana to cast a spell, gain 1 life from Aetherflux Reservoir. You do that again, you gain 2 life. So instead of losing 2 life in that cycle, you've lost 1 life. Do it a third time, you net even on life. Do it a fourth time, you've actually created 1 life overall. So you keep doing that, you generate infinite life and infinite mana. So it's pretty awesome. This is just it's a pretty expensive card in terms of its mana cost for what it does. But it's another one of those things where if you get to untap with it, you're probably going to do pretty well with it. You can put a lot of mana into X spells, or put a lot of mana into expensive spells, kickers, things like that, at the cost of life a lot earlier in the game. So that's pretty cool. Having that out and then kicking a Rites of Replication or something like that and targeting a Dockside Extortionist, you're never going to need mana for the rest of the game unless you get Cyclonic Rifted. So that's it for creatures to begin with. Next up, we've got sorceries. So Faithless Looting, just a great card to loop with Underworld Breach. If you got Lion's Eye Diamond as well, it's great. It's just a great way to get cards into your graveyard. So I'll always include that in this kind of deck. Gitaxian Probe should speak for itself. It's just, free spell. Look at a player's hand, draw a card. It's one of those awesome things is if you've got this card, because of Krark and Sakashima, and we'll go into a lot of detail when we get to our artifacts a bit later on. I'll go into how these flips work. So Gitaxian Probe, because it's free, quote unquote, it can essentially stop a lot of stalemates with not having mana, or if you've got a whole bunch of life, you can do this a whole bunch of times to generate a big storm count because of being able to pay for it with life. Ponder, Preordain, staples for any blue deck. It's good card draw, good card selection. Occasionally the shuffle's relevant for Ponder. Grape Shot, this is our our storm payoff, so it just deals damage to target player or creature. Because we've got ways to get things out of the graveyard, don't worry about having to do it early. Even if you generate a storm count 10 or something like that, storm count 15, and you've got to just use it to remove key opponent pieces, I think that's fine. It's also really good because you can do things like break out a lock, from an opposition agent or a hull breacher or something like that. It's really awesome for that. Merchant Scroll, obviously tutors, really good. Shadow Skull, Smashing, and Seagate Restoration. These are our modal dual face cards. Both of them I think are very average outside of the fact that they have flexibility with lands. You can pump a whole lot of mana into this and remove quite a few creatures. That can sometimes be relevant. Jeska's Will. This card is absolutely gas. So you have your commander out on the field, and essentially it is a huge ritual. And also it card draws, so you exile the top 3 cards, you can play them. So that's actually great because it means you can do it for lands. It's play, not cast. Rites of Replication, this should be a bit of a no-brainer because we don't have to worry about our legendary creature rule with Sakashima out. You can clone literally any creature that you want on the battlefield, or anyone else's creatures, even if they're legendary as well. So if your opponent's playing something that's just amazing on its own, well, you can have 5 of them, and it's just absolute gas. Sakashima's Will, another great card. Target opponent chooses a creature they control, you gain control of it. You choose a creature you control, each other creature you control becomes a copy of that creature until end of turn. So this is pretty cool. I don't mind this card. I think it's pretty fun to do if you want to make a whole bunch of something that's going to making a whole bunch of Burgies, making a whole bunch of hull breaches or something like that to really stop someone from being able to remove it on the spot. I think it's really great. Obviously it's a sorcery speed, so you can't respond to things, but it's still a great card. Lots of different use cases for it. I've been experimenting with that card. I think it's really fun. I think it's really good, but it's probably there are better decks that are suited for it over this. Mana Geyser, it's just a big ritual. Reforge the Soul, it's just a wheel. And Expropriate, you're going to get lots of mana, and if you can cast this when you can copy it, it's just insane. You're taking extra turns, stealing permanents. It's just amazing. Um, Instants and sorceries, I'll try and sort of speed through these. It's basically control elements and a few key pieces. So we've got Brainstorm, more card draw. Flusterstorm, it's just a great counter spell because we've got a whole bunch of different storm effects. High Tide, this is just absolute gas. You use it to just ramp up on the turn that we want to win. Pongify, just blue removal. That's a bit better than just direct damage. Pyroblast, destroy target permanent if it's blue or counter target blue spell. I really like these cards. It's really one of those cards that you look at the pod, and if you've got an extra 2 cards at the start of your your game and you want to just basically sub it out because no one else is playing blue, I think that's good. The other fringe cases could be that you want to destroy your own Sakashima and recast it after you've got infinite mana or infinite life. That's a perfectly relevant use case, but it's perfectly fine if you remove the Pyroblast and Red Elemental Blast if you're not playing a interaction heavy format. Rapid Hybridization, exactly the same thing as Pongify, just blows stuff up. It's really good. Psych Rift doesn't really need explanation. Desperate Ritual, it's another it is another ritual. Dramatic Reversal, we've got Isochron Scepter with a whole bunch of other targets for Isochron Scepter, so this is a no-brainer with the amount of mana rocks that we're going to be running. Mana Drain, it's a good counterspell. Narset's Reversal, sometimes we don't want to resolve the spells that we cast, so we bounce our own spells. Remand, good counterspell, draws a card. Snap, untap 2 lands, return target creature to its owner's hand. Great free quote-unquote spell because it gets to untap 2 lands, so we're always happy about that. If you've got High Tide, it's obviously a ritual as well. Deflecting Swat and Fierce Guardianship, these are just great interaction spells. Force Negation, same thing. Force of Will, exactly the same thing again. Frantic Search is good. It's another one of those free spells, so you use it to generate a bit of value and then increase your storm count. Fact or Fiction, just good card selection. Rewind, another free spell, great for storm count up. Same thing with Turnabout, so it's just tap or untap artifacts, creatures, or lands that you control. Now what's really cool is, and you're going to see we're going to create multiple copies of this so that we get it back to our hand, get a free spell, and then we get to untap and net mana through a whole bunch of combos. Submerge, Expansion Explosion, Nexus of Fate. I think all of these will make sense if you've played the format quite a bit. Expansion Explosion is just a way to win the game on the spot. You take out one player, but make sure that you don't draw more than the cards that you have in your deck, which is quite risky if you've got copy spells. Artifacts, we've got Lotus Petal, Mana Crypt, Soul Ring, Arcane Signet, Isochron Scepter, Izzet Signet, Sapphire Medallion, Talisman of Creativity. Those are all of our rocks, which are separate to everything else. The Twinning Staff, this is just a copy artifact. It's awesome. Aether Flux Reservoir, we've got a way to increase our life, through casting spells, which is obviously what we're doing. Primal Amulet, it's ramp, and then you can transform it, which turns it into a Primal Wellspring, so it's a copy land, basically. You make a mana and use it to copy a spell, basically, which is just gas in this deck. Pyromancer's Goggles, exactly the same thing again. And here we have probably the coolest card in the deck, which would suck in pretty much every other deck, is Krark's Thumb. So legendary artifact, if you would flip a coin, instead flip 2 coins and ignore 1. Rounding things up, we've got Thousand Year Storm. When you cast an instant or sorcery spell, copy it for each other instant sorcery you've cast this turn. So basically, you cast a Brainstorm, storm count is 1, you create a copy of that Brainstorm, you get 2 Brainstorms. Then you cast another spell, let's pick it, you cast a Gitaxian Probe, you get 2 copies of Gitaxian Probe, so you get a total of 3 casts of Gitaxian Probe. Then you cast a Sakashima's Will or a Rites of Replication Kicked. You get a whole bunch of copies of that. And then you Grape Shot, and it actually casts the Grape Shot that many times, and you get exponentially more damage off the back of that. So these things ramp up very quickly. Other enchantments, Mystic Remora, Rhystic Study, they make sense. It's card draw and taxing. And then Underworld Breach, this is so we can recur some cards that have resolved every now and again. Right, so that's pretty much all the cards in the deck. I'm not going to go through the lands. They're very, very basic. Probably the only thing that's worth mentioning is Mystic Sanctuary is sometimes putting a card back onto the top of our library, instant or sorcery. So that's pretty basic. Other than that, it's just getting access to our colors, fetching, card thinning, shuffles, all of that kind of stuff. Fiery Islet, we get to draw a card. So in terms of understanding how our win conditions work and piloting, we don't always want to resolve our spells from our hand. By having both commanders out, we can often cast a card and return it. So you win one flip and you lose one flip. And if we've got Krark's Thumb out, this becomes easier and easier because we can, flip 2 times or 4 times or whatever it might be. With Krark's Thumb and both of your commanders out, there's only a 6.5% chance that we'll be forced to resolve a spell. So what that means is, overwhelmingly, we're going to get 3 copies that are cast, and our rituals and cantrips are going to return to our hands. So as soon as we've got this engine built, it's a 6% chance that we actually can only do the thing once. And then with a clone, it's less than 2%. It's 1.5% or something like that. It's important to really note, if you look at the Gatherer rules for this, if you win a flip, but the spell that caused Krark's triggered ability to trigger isn't on the stack anymore, most likely because it's countered or something like that, the copy's still created, so it doesn't matter which one of our spell resolves. If it's a free spell or something you don't want to go into the graveyard, you can basically fail your first flip and then you get another chance to resolve a copy afterwards, but it's highly situational. So it means that you've got to really work out which order you want to actually cast, and fail and win your flips. So, if we cast something like a ritual, we cast the spell, the ability triggers, or the ability triggers twice, and we flip a coin. If we lose the flip, the card goes back to our hand, but maybe it doesn't. If we lose the flip, it goes back to our hand. That's cool. The second instance of it happens, we flip it. If we lose that flip, doesn't matter. Card is already back in our hand. If we win the flip, we copy the spell and choose new targets for the copy, and it uses the last known information. So it's not like if you fail first and the card goes off of the stack that it can't read the old card, because it doesn't work like that. It basically means that you get to pick and choose how it resolves. So if you have Krark the Thumbless, Sakashima, and Krark's Thumb out, it effectively means that if you want to keep casting a ritual, for example, you've got to fail 4 times in a row or win 4 times in a row. So you would flip a coin. If you don't like the outcome, you flip it again and you ignore one of them. So you've got to lose both of those flips, and by winning you might be doing heads twice so the spell resolves. But then you can do it again because the copy of Krark from Sakashima means that you can do that again. So that's that 6% that I was talking about, so 6.25%. So all 4 of those have got to fail consistently. If you have things that already copy spells, so your Twinning Staff, Primal Amulet, your Pyromancer's Goggles, Thousand Year Storm, all of these things, you kind of don't want cards to leave your hand. You want them to be cast, put onto the stack, create copies of them, and then you return that card back to your hand. So if you think about just how many times that might happen with one cast of Grape Shot, you've essentially got one cast, a copy goes onto the stack. That doesn't count to your cast because it's put directly onto the stack, it's not cast. But then you return that to the hand. That doesn't resolve, that's still a storm count of 1. So you then do that again, and then you've netted 1 storm count at the same time. And as I said, 6% of the time is when it's going to fail. So you can keep doing this a whole bunch of times. But with storm cards in particular, because of the compounding effect, you get a 1 damage or 2 damage Grape Shot first of all, and then you'll get a 4 damage Grape Shot, and then you'll get an 8 damage Grape Shot, and it just really compounds so quickly, in terms of being able to do that. And then if you have something like Expropriate, you don't need it to resolve more than once or twice. If you can take 4 or 5 extra turns and steal a whole bunch of permanents, you've already won the game. So you really only need 1 of these storm turns to actually go off. I feel like it's probably one of those decks where you're going to win from people scooping a lot, because they're not going to want to give you their permanents. They're going to want to just leave when they realize that you're going to take 6 extra turns and you're going to win 4 of their permanents or something like that. So it's a really great deck in that respect. As I mentioned, the deck, it's reasonably expensive, coming in at $1,000. It's mostly going to be, a few choice pieces like your mana crypts and things like that. You can definitely find ways to reduce the cost. Force of Will, obviously another big one. Reduce the cost further and still preserve the integrity of the deck. All of the win conditions are super cheap. $7 card here, $7 card here. What's Gut Shot? Gut Shot's not going to be much more than that. Yeah, 80 cents, a Grape Shot rather. 80 cents for that. You know, your 3 win conditions with those, it's literally $15. So the core of the deck can be built and you can take it in any direction you want. Look, thanks so much for checking out my video. I know it's a bit of a longer one, so we'll see how the longer format for this goes. And if you like the content, please feel free to like and share and subscribe, and you know, add me on Discord, and you know, all of that other wonderful stuff. So yeah, cool. Thanks very much.